Okay, so now we've learned a lot of regex, right? We've learned about literal patterns. We learned about range boxes and single character selection. We've learned about repetitions and groupings and special symbols for optional objects or one-to-many or things like that, right? We've learned a ton. We learned a little bit about these flags, and we've got all this knowledge bouncing around in our heads now, but the real question becomes, how do we apply what we know about regex to our code in JavaScript? So to do that, I have gone ahead and made a demo file called regexdemo.js, and I've also taken all of our sample data and put it into a text file called samplelog.txt. If I click on that, you can see that we've got all of our sample data just without word wrapping. So if I extend this out over here, you'll see that we have all the data and so on. This is exactly the same data that we've been playing with in regex101.com. First, I want to show you how to set up your JS code so that you can read in a file of text. First, let's declare a constant called fs, and let's set it equal to the value of requiring the fs node module. Remember from our previous experience that when we do this, what we're saying is there is some module, some library that belongs to Node that we need to bring in to our code space, to bring it so that it's basically visible to the rest of my code. And this we do with modules that are not normally by default visible. By not requiring all the modules, it keeps our code much skinnier behind the scenes. So here we're going to say that we need the fs module, and fs in this case is short for file system. This is Node's file system module, and it allows us to open and create and delete and modify and read files on the system. And then we're going to jump down a couple lines for readability, and we'll say fs.readFile. And readFile is a function that is going to require three things of us. First, it wants the path to the file we wish to read. Now, because I put the text file in the same directory as all of my executing JS code, including the regexdemo.js file, we have a really simple path. The path is simply the name of the file with its extension. So as a string, let's type in samplelog.txt or .txt. That indicates which file we wish readFile to actually open and read. After that string, but still inside the parentheses, let's put a comma and a space for readability, and then we're going to say the kind of encoding that the data in the file is in. The encoding in this case is very simply ASCII, which we express also as a string. ASCII stands for the American Standard for Character Information Interchange. Yeah, it's a really attractive title there. But this just says that the file we're about to read contains standard ASCII data. Finally, the last thing it wants is some function it can call when the readFile function is done. See, this readFile function is special. It basically runs in the background until it's finished. Once you tell it to start, it runs secretly behind the scenes until it's done. And when it's done, it wants a function to call to let you know that it's done so that you can take the next action. So we're going to create an arrow function here. And for readability, I'm going to drop that down a line. And this arrow function is going to take in two parameters, okay? It's going to take in something called err. We can call it whatever we want, but err is simple. It's short for error. And data, which represents the data read in from the file. In other words, the data that the file contains. Okay, the way this readFile function works, if the path we've given is good, and the file is accessible, and it's in the right encoding, as specified here, then the error object will be null, and the data object will contain whatever the file contained. If we've given the bad path, like if we misspelled this, or if we gave it a directory that doesn't exist, or something to that effect, if what we've supplied here does not lead to a real file, or if the encoding we've provided cannot be used to read the contents of the file, or any one of a number of other issues, we will get an error object that will describe what problems were encountered, and the data itself will be null. So knowing that, I like to check to make sure that the error is not null first. If it's not null, that means an error occurred and I need to do something. For the purposes of our demo, let's just keep it simple and let's just log out to the console a message like there was an error, and then, oh, you know what? I'm going to change these single ticks to the interpolation ticks, and I'm going to use an interpolation command here for the error object itself. In other words, I'm going to print this really simple message and then print out the entire contents of this error object. Now, in the event that everything works just fine, as it should, now we can continue on, right? So in other words, this consequence is there was a problem reading the file. And down here, the file data was read successfully. And just to prove that this works, I'm going to go ahead and just console log this thing and print all the data that we received. So we're going to call the readFile function. It's going to look for a file with this name in the same directory as our regexdemo.js file. It's going to read this target file based on the encoding we've specified, assuming that it's ASCII basically. And then when it's done reading all the data, it's either going to give us an error object if something bad happened, or it's going to give us all the data that it read in this parameter, and it's going to execute this function here. Sweet. So let's go ahead and execute to make sure that it works just fine. And sure enough, here is all the data from our file, so we know that this read file works. So now that we know this read file works, now we're ready to move on to the next step.